I would like to welcome everybody for this final session for today. And we are pleased to hear a lecture given by Mary Getui. She is a professor of religious studies at the Catholic University of East Africa. And her presentation is entitled with Lessons on Conversion based on two selected eras in the history of Christianity in Eastern Africa. Let us listen to this presentation.
I have some thoughts to share, and the title of my presentation is I'm very grateful for the invitation and opportunity to participate in this conference on conversion. I have some thoughts to share, and the title of my presentation is Lessons on Conversion based on two selected eras in the history of Christianity in Eastern Africa. I have an outline. I have an outline on the issues I want to address. There's a brief introduction. I want to analyze a little bit on the Portuguese era in Eastern Africa. And I'll also pay attention to the revival movement in Eastern Africa. I'll also talk a little bit about Ninian Smart and the experiential dimension of religion, and then we will have a conclusion. In this conference, I'm sure there have been many, and there will be many ways of looking at conversion, but I want to look at it as making a turn, moving away from the former way or former ways, adopting a new way of doing things. This could be our actions, our behavior, our attitude, our mindset, and even our convictions. From the Christian perspective, it is making a deliberate decision to be a follower or a committed follower of Jesus Christ. And a good example we can give on conversion is as covered in Acts 9 and the experience of Paul. Secondly, I like to ask, why could we be focusing on conversion? I'm sure those who organized for this conference must have thought very much around this, but I want to submit two issues which I think are important for this subject to be covered. And one is the ecclesial reason to make more and committed followers to Jesus Christ as per the mandate which is given in Matthew 28:16-20. But I think also academicians have a responsibility to interrogate, to analyze a concept such as this so that it can inform for the ecclesial reason. Under introduction, the other point I would like to bring across is that when we are talking about conversion, it is linked to various other aspects of Christianity. And one of them is mission, evangelism, discipleship, revival, transformation, stewardship, and salvation. So when we are talking about conversion, it is very much related and linked to these other very important aspects. And so let's go to the Portuguese era in Eastern Africa. This is something that happened way back in the 16th century. And it's curious to note that this, one of the reasons why the Portuguese came to Eastern Africa and to other parts of the world, it was to convert. It was for conversion purposes. But this period is referred to as a failure with regard to the introduction and establishment of Christianity. And we want to ask ourselves why, so that we can learn some lessons. There are several factors, but I've just noted a few. The first one being that the Portuguese, apart from coming to spread Christianity, they were also guided by political, commercial, and adventure reasons. And so the lesson or the question we could ask ourselves is, when we are talking about issues of conversion, or we are interested in mission, should it be one prong or should it be multiple prong? And then what is the priority? And also, of course, for the Portuguese at that time, they had competition with the other powers in Europe. So all things about context and time are extremely important. And the success of conversion will be determined by factors such as these. When the Portuguese arrived in Eastern Africa, they came with force, and they created uneasiness and hostility with the indigenous people, and also the Arabs, who were already having a stronghold on trade and had already made conversions to Islam. What lesson could we learn from here is how to approach or relate to the prevailing context, the culture of the people, and also other conversion efforts that are already in place or may be already taking place, because this will determine the success or the failure of mission efforts. The Portuguese did not venture too much into the interior, to the deep interior of Eastern Africa. Of course, this is understood because they did not have enough personnel, they did not have enough resources, and all the challenges, including language. But there are lessons we can learn from here, that conversion means that the comfort zone may not prevail, and also preparing adequately on personnel, on resources, and other requirements. The Portuguese befriended some political leaders and hoped that they would help them to reach the people. But their choice was not necessarily of the popular leaders, political leaders, indigenous leaders. And the lesson we can learn from here is the place of political goodwill. How should it be earned? How should it be approached? And the use of local resources. I know this is very sensitive, whether when we are talking about conversion, whether the political climate and political issues are important. There were no women in the delegation of the Portuguese, and this raised cultural questions. And I want to look at two. One of them was whether where these people came from, there were no women. But also, the people came to think there must be women. That is why they are grabbing our women. That's why they are capturing them. And this was quite a challenge. It raises the issue of participation of women and also morality issues in their entire context. The Portuguese carried out mass baptisms. This is happening even today when there are efforts, when there are crusades, but it raises the issue of the need for individual attention and also preparation of these masses. The Portuguese who came to Eastern Africa, they were of Catholic persuasion, and they carried out the baptism as the Catholics would carry it. So when the people were being asked much later, how was your baptism experience? Many of them could only remember the taste of the salty taste of water. So what is the meaning of baptism, and what should it entail when it comes to conversion? The Portuguese gave new names. I want to look at this deeper, that conversion also has a bearing on identity and on newness. At the beginning, we said conversion is turning away from old ways and new ways. How does this happen? Is it just the giving of a name, or there are deeper issues as well? One of the reasons why, or another reason why the Portuguese didn't do well, is that there was no follow-up. And so all they did in East Africa just melted away with time. And so, unfortunately, this period is referred to as a period of failure. I think the lesson that can be learned from here is the essence of follow-up, and the essence of trying to find out what, when we have reached the unreached or those who need conversion, what effort goes in on discipleship. Otherwise, the effort can just go down the drain. So much for the Portuguese era. We want to look at the revival movement in Eastern Africa. This was a revival that swept from Rwanda. Some sources say from the 1920s, others say from the mid-1930s. But this was a wave that swept through Eastern and Central Africa in the starting, let's say 1920s, but very strong in the 40s and 50s. And even today, there are still pockets. And those of this movement were referred to as the Kututendereza adherents. This is a Uganda term. There are many lessons that we can learn on conversion, that those who joined the revival movement were already Christians, and they belonged to the various denominations found on the Eastern and Central Africa. So the question is, could we be Christians already, but we need to be converted? So is there like reconversion? Because these people were already Christian, but when this wave came, then they were converted. The members were drawn from across denominations. So is conversion a denominational issue, or it does not matter? Could any one denomination have the preserve of conversion? The members of the revival movement, they were referred to as abalokole. The saved, the converted, or the transformed people, the people of light. Where I come from in Western Kenya, they were referred to as the people of the spirit. And their life reflected a distinct difference from what it was before and what it was after they encountered the Holy Spirit and said that they had the Holy Spirit in them. They also gave testimonies on the strong connection that they now had after the conversion, the strong connection they had to the divine. They had open confession of sin, repentance, and even restitution. Indeed, some of them returned what they had taken that was not theirs. There was a bit of controversy on this, whether the open confession, the public confession was necessary. And there are those who said, no, it should just be between you and God. But I think what we need to gather from here is that there's this turnaround. Probably also reminds us of that song, that the things I used to do, the places I used to go, I don't do them anymore. Now, the people of the revival movement, they also had a strong zeal for missionary work. Remember, we said we cannot talk about conversion without talking about mission. And they traveled long distances to share with family, to share with others, and even church members on the need for conversion. They devoted a lot of time to Bible study among themselves. And they also developed a very strong sense of community and referred to each other as ndugu and dada in Kiswahili, meaning brother and sister, and they formed very strong fellowships. Indeed, they knew each other across the region, and they were not barred by denominational barriers. They had a strong sense of diligence and integrity at personal level and at work. Indeed, very good stewards. That employers were quick to look for the people or the adherents of the revival movement because they were regarded as trustworthy. In the revival movement, lay leadership was promoted, women, youth, men, and they did not have to have had theological training, even as they led the Bible study, as they did mission work. And this then says that when we are talking about issues of mission, how do we involve the lay people? There's a lot more that we can say about the revival movement. In recent times, that spirit has waned, probably now replaced by Pentecostalism and the evangelical movement. Indeed, descendants of many of the members of the adherents of the revival movement are identified with evangelical and the Pentecostal groups. But I think there's a lot that we can learn from the revival movement. Next, we want to look at conversion as looked at by Ninian Smart. Ninian Smart is one of the scholars on religion, especially in the last century. And he has identified 7 dimensions of religion: the practical and the ritual, the mythic or narrative, the doctrinal and philosophical, the ethical and legal, the social and institutional, the material, but are more interested in the experiential and emotional dimension. If we look at the story of Paul, and if we look at the story of the adherents of the revival movement, there is experience by the individual, which changes the person from one way of doing things to another. Ninian Smart says that the experiential dimension ought to be given a lot of emphasis when we are looking at issues of religion, because it says that the individual acknowledges and recognizes the place of the sacred, the place of the divine, the place of God, and that the experiential dimension is that deep, very, very inner experience that an individual has with their maker, the fear, not in the negative sense, but that recognition that there is a power greater than ourselves that we need to be devoted to. And Ninian Smart recommends that the state of experiencing the issue of being engaged with the divine, it is something that needs to be yearned for by those who claim to have recognition of religion, recognition of Christianity, recognition of conversion. And I want to dwell a little more on this, but simply to say that when we are talking about conversion, it is something that scholars of religion have recognized and have recommended, and Ninian Smart is one such example. I want to conclude by saying that for the reasons we stated earlier, the ecclesial reasons and the academic reasons, conversion is a worth pursuit, given that human beings and even Christians have shortcomings, and therefore we need conversion to change from this to that. And we can see that the revival movement, it was a change from that which is carnal, that which is not promoting goodness, to that which promotes community, to that which promotes issues that are pro-life. We also see that conversion is not an easy road. Look at the effort of the Portuguese, good intention, good effort, but at the end, really very little to show. So it is therefore imperative to learn from history regarding what did not work, and especially from the Portuguese era, and avoid such pitfalls. It is also imperative to acknowledge the value and the benefits of conversion and promote accordingly. If we look at the life of the adherents of the revival movement, it's almost a reminder of what the early church was about, as covered in the book of Acts. So it's important to look at conversion and what it does for the individual and even for the community. It is also important to know that conversion is a personal experience. I may not claim conversion because my parent or my colleague or my pastor or my church has had this experience. So it calls for a personal conviction. And it is a continuing journey. That is why the members of the revival movement were already Christian, but they then got or experienced a conversion. It is a spiritual endeavor, deep inside the person, and the ultimate being the quest for salvation. And so when we are talking about conversion, we are not talking about issues of here, but we are also talking about issues of eternity. Conversion contributes to the good of humanity and to the good of the wider society. And so I want to submit that it is worth the effort to talk about conversion, because it challenges us to think about our own personal experience with our Maker, and also the need to share on this experience with others, and also give them the conviction on why it is good that all of us experience conversion, and how much more, especially in this period of history, when there is so much that is happening, we truly need conversion, and to talk about it and to analyze and to see how we can learn and how we can move forward. I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Getui. I do not see Dr. Getui in the on the microphone, so I don't know if she would be able to answer any questions. I have actually not seen any questions coming in from the public. The first thing that my first response is that Dr. Getui is reflecting on a colonial era, especially the Portuguese, but also on the 40s and 50s of this century, where we see that there's a revival movement in Eastern and Central Africa. Of course, the whole question about mission and colonialism is an important issue. And then when you would reflect on conversion within a colonial context, and that is why we say we have as a title, multiple conversion, multiple contexts and multiple perspectives. Well, what kind of impact would that make if conversion is within this happening within this colonial context? And from what I heard from Dr. Getui is there were not too many, like the results from the Portuguese area was not that great. And I heard that she was very positive about the 40s and 50s, the revival movement that took place. Well, that was still not independence. Actually, you have a broader question, about colonialism. Has the expansion of Christianity, to other countries, has it ever been without colonial effort? We could ask that question, and you can go back right to the early centuries of the Christian church, and you see that this has been especially in Stephen Neal's book on colonialism and Christian mission, where he has noted that mission has really benefited from colonial efforts. I see now that a question has come in. Conversion, it is said, is a personal experience. What is the role of the church in conversion? I just got a message that Dr. Getui is trying to log in. Maybe what we do is I give a provisional answer and see if Dr. Getui can come back to this this question. I think with a personal experience, from what I understood that Dr. Getui was saying, is that you have these mass conversions, as she referred to in the Portuguese era, and you see then in the 40s and 50s that there's more an emphasis on personal faith, and that it's having an appeal to people's emotions and experiences, that actually people were, a lot of lay people were involved in the church at that time. There was a very positive response of people in society towards Christians, because Christians were seen as people with integrity that you could depend upon. It was the revival was also promoting a sense of community. People addressed each other as brother, sister, and with fraternal terms. So in other words, there was an emphasis on community. And in that sense, you could say that the conversion was a more of a personal experience. Now, what role does the church have in this? That is, I haven't heard too much other than that this was a revival movement, and I assume that this revival movement was initiated by the churches. I did hear Dr. Getui say that the Pentecostal churches have basically continued this revival, and that you could say the after effects are still being felt today. And in that sense, you could say that, and this is an emphasis of Dr. Getui, is that conversion is actually something that is important because it is pro-life, and it is also for the good of society. In other words, the transformation of the person also benefits the wider society. I hope that addresses the question. Let us, I see that it's now almost 4 o'clock, 1 more minute to go. So I would suggest, okay, I see that Dr. Getui is in a chat, but I haven't seen a chat. I suggest, because it's now 4 o'clock and we have, according to the schedule, our break. I would have loved to hear Dr. Getui respond to the questions, but since I think the system is not able to let her go in, I suggest that we would end our session here. And I would like to express gratitude to the fine presentation of Dr. Getui and the reflection on conversion within an African context, colonial, and then in East and Central Africa, where we see that the revival has had consequences, positive results, even for the day of today. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to see you again at the panel discussion tonight, which begins at 4:30, and this will be moderated by Felix Poniatowski and Gary Krause and James Park. James Park will be in a discussion tonight on the issue of urban mission. Have a nice break, and I'll see you then later. Bye-bye.
I'm very grateful for the